I'm a geek. We rank stuff. I have finished the latest season of Black Mirror. Reviews for that were going up in the Break Room of Geeks, my secondary channel, if you weren't catching those. But now it's time for me to do something that I have not done in a while, and that is to give a full ranking of all of Black Mirror. Every episode, including the specials. Now, this has been a while since I've done this. As I said, last time I did this, it was before season 5 came out. So I've got 2 seasons plus the Bandersnatch special to work in. But even if you remember the last time I did this, which if you do, bless you, you've been around for a while. Even if that's the case, don't assume you know where everything's going to land, because some of the things that were already on the list have shifted position as my own feelings have changed and evolved with time. Not necessarily that the work has gotten worse, but, for very visibly evident reasons, I'm not the same person I was when I ranked those things before. How will that affect the way things shake out? Well, let's find out. We got 28 of these to go. Let's get to it. Number 28, Beyond the Sea. Yeah, I'm actually kind of surprised that this one ended up coming in at the bottom, and this might get some heat. I don't know. Feelings on this one seem to be very mixed. Here's the short version of why this one comes in at the bottom for me. I don't know what it's doing. And that's very rare for Black Mirror. Generally, I know what they're trying for, and even sometimes they're trying for nothing of substance and it's just aiming to be fun. We'll get to some examples of that in a little bit. But this, I don't know what it's actually doing. And being as long as it is and being shot and framed and presented the way it is, it really feels like it thinks it's making a point. I don't know what that is. And part of the fallout of me not knowing for sure what it's doing is I don't even know how much I should be criticizing. Like, do I criticize the ending for fridging the major female character and treating her as disposable and more important for her death impacting the male character? Or do I not criticize that because the misogyny is part of what is supposed to be going on? Like, is this a deconstruction of misogyny? I don't know. Like, there's stuff that I don't like, but I don't even know if I can criticize it rightfully because I don't know what this one's doing. I just don't. I don't know what point it's trying to make. I don't know what the intent of the final scene is. I just don't know what it's doing. Number 27, Men Against Fire. Now, this one I do get, and it's actually not even badly made. And honestly, I probably rank this lower than nearly anybody else if I were to guess. But the thing is, ultimately, this is the episode of Black Mirror that I feel is the most derivative. In that this plot line, this twist, I've seen it done. Like, very literally. I saw practically this exact same scenario play out in the 90s version of The Outer Limits. And that might have been the first time I saw it, but it's a concept that's older than that. And I'm not saying that to be like, oh, it's a ripoff. The thing is, a lot of the ideas presented in Black Mirror aren't necessarily new or have never been done before. It's just they're usually presented in a slightly different way or with a slightly different way of presenting it, or like just being done at a higher level of execution than the idea has been done before. None of that's really the case here. It's fine. It's perfectly serviceable, but I've literally seen this exact thing done already. So, yeah. Number 26, the Waldo moment. This, I guess a little bit like Beyond the Sea, doesn't quite pull together, except at least I think I know what this one's trying to do. Whereas Beyond the Sea, I don't know what it's aiming for. I think I understand what the Waldo moment is doing, but the way that it is kind of integrating the parody of the political system, as well as integrating the idea of a piece of artwork getting out of control and out of the hands of the original artist, who is not able to properly maintain or control the way that it is perceived by the public. Those two ideas don't fully gel. Like, I could see how they would have, and it's not that far off. I just feel like it needed one or two more drafts, like, to really solidify the melding of its thematic elements. I've heard that it plays better if you're from the UK and you're used to the whole concept of joke candidates, because that is actually a thing over there. But I'm fond of saying I can only speak from the perspective I have, and from that perspective, I don't quite think this one pulls together. Number 25, Maisie Day. This one people seem to really dislike. It's from the latest season. I actually think it's quite fun. Now, I alluded to an episode that like really isn't trying to do anything other than just be kind of fun. This is that one. This thing does not have particularly high ambitions. It integrates a supernatural element that I think threw a lot of people off. It wasn't the only episode to do so in that season. However, it was one where the supernatural element kind of came out of nowhere, whereas the other one, which we'll get to later in the list, that one presented it pretty much up front, so it at least gave you the time to adjust to it, whereas this kind of just dropped it on you at a, I don't know, 2/3 point or so. But I still enjoy it. I like the energy of it. I think the performances are good. It's not deep. It's not making all that much of a point, but I don't think it's trying to either. And so if I'm going to compare this to something like Beyond the Sea, I'll take something that aims low but just feels like it's well executed and manages what it tried to do, to something that feels like it was made with a higher production value but just doesn't seem to even know what it's doing, or if it does, it doesn't know how to communicate it properly. I honestly, at the end of the day, prefer something that knows what it is and nails what it's going for over something that is ambitious and just doesn't pull together. Personal preference. Number 24, Shut Up and Dance. This one is almost really good. It falls apart because of the final twist. At least it does for me. So Shut Up and Dance has this whole thing with this young guy just getting wrapped up with these trolls who have gotten some information and some video on him, and it's just escalating. It's becoming worse and worse and worse and worse as he's being goaded into this succession of worse and worse things, ultimately culminating in a situation where he faces off against a complete stranger, and one of them's going to have to kill the other. And the thing is, the way it's presented is way more interesting than what the twist is. Because the way it's presented, it really feels like it's about escalation. It's about, okay, well, you do something to cover up for this little thing, but the thing that you did to cover it up is bigger. And then you have to cover that up, so that's bigger and bigger and bigger. And the spiral of it. And the fact that it initially seems to start with something relatively innocuous felt like it added to the power. So finding out with the final twist, like, no, actually this young guy is actually kind of terrible and he's covering up something way worse. I'm like, oh, that actually takes the wind out of the sails of this thing rather considerably for me. So it was quite good up until the final twist, which I actually think undermines what was working up to that point. Number 23, Archangel. Just to be clear, at this point on, I do think these are all good, and I don't think any of these are really bad or like don't work, or I may have some criticisms, but not as much as what we've talked about up to now. But from here, it is largely a matter of personal preference, because there's certainly nothing wrong with Archangel. I think it approaches its ideas about helicopter parenting pretty well. The issue for me is I just can't really relate to it. I never had a parent like that. I'm not a parent like that. I actually have never really known anyone who has had a parent like that, at least in the time that I've known them. So it's the kind of parenting experience, either having a parent that is that level of overprotective or feeling parental instincts that are that degree of overprotective. I can't relate to it on either end. Like, I'm protective of my kid, don't get me wrong, but I can't relate to this woman. And that's not to say that she's like impossible to relate to. Obviously, other people can and do. Just for me, I just can't connect in on the scenario that's being done. It still seems pretty well executed. I just don't have a lot of attachment to it. Number 22, Smithereens. This one is honestly largely buoyed by really good performances, because its overall point that it's kind of making about social media, about the detachment of tech CEOs and the ways that this whole thing can just cause just really toxic behavior and cause things to spiral and spin out of control and bring out the worst in people. Like, it's solid and it works, but it's also just a little bit more fatalistic, nihilistic, doomerist, I guess, than I really care for at this particular point. So, like, it's fine, but it's one of the ones that I have never watched a second time. I've never felt the need. Number 21, Playtest. This is one that actually it kind of, I'll relate it to Men Against Fire. This is not a super unique core concept. It's something I've seen done more than a few times. However, it does do it better than I've usually seen it done, because this idea of someone kind of losing himself into this virtual reality game situation, by and large, those things don't work. Like, I love David Cronenberg, but Existence does not work for me at all, because it's very clear that David Cronenberg does not understand games and doesn't understand why people play games. He was using games to try and make some other point, but like the fact that I'm watching this going, nobody would ever play this. This is not how games work. Just pulled me out of that story. Here, Charlie Brooker, with his background, he knows how games work. He knows the inner workings of games. He knows how testing works. And so this is able to take an idea that the core idea I've seen done before, but do it better by bringing in actual knowledge, because he knows what he's talking about. It's still not like amazing or fantastic, but it's just a better execution of this idea than I've usually seen. Number 20, Metalhead. I used to have this one ranked a fair bit higher, I'm pretty sure. This is kind of a one that exemplifies for me sort of how I've changed over the years, which is that the fatalistic nature of it and just how screwed everything is, how dark this actually is. I guess I just kind of moved past that in general. I think at the time that I saw this, I was at the tail end of my ability to appreciate this kind of material. That doesn't make it any worse than it ever has been. I actually think the stark black and white look of the thing is quite good. I've seen some people criticize the ending twist that like all these people were after were these friggin' stuffed bears for a kid that's dying anyways. And I've seen some people criticize that, like on the basis of why would people risk their lives for this? I'm like, that's the point. That's how screwed the entire world is. That human life means so little that you might as well risk it just to bring a smile to the face of a dying child, because what the hell else are you going to do? I actually think it is well executed, and that twist makes sense. I actually like the way the dogs are done. I like how they're built for efficiency and simplicity, and they're not particularly intimidating, but dang, are they deadly. It's just a level of doom and gloom that I just don't connect with at this point the way that I used to. It's still quite well done, though. Number 19, Bandersnatch. This was a weird one to figure out where to put it, because, like, how do you rank this one? How do you evaluate it? Do you evaluate it as a narrative? If so, how? Do you evaluate it on how your narrative experience was it on your first time viewing? Do you evaluate it on if you went back and saw every possible variation? Do you evaluate what you think is the best one? All of them? How much do you take the interaction into account? Like, there's a lot to factor into this. This is, I think, a very cool experiment. It's also something I don't think needs to happen ever again. Not with Black Mirror or indeed anything else. But the way that it fits together, the way that it kind of breaks its own reality here and there, it's well done. For what it is trying to be, I think it actually hits it pretty well. It is one of those things that once I saw every alternate version, I'm like, I have no reason to ever watch this ever again. But it's still kind of cool every now and then to look at the flow chart of the options and to see the different ways that it can go. Like, it's the kind of thing that's very easy to admire, but I don't really need to go back to. Number 18, White Bear. This one, for me, is kind of just mid on the scale of Black Mirror, understanding that mid Black Mirror is high end for most other things. One thing I really appreciate about this one is the intensity of the dilemma, the moral dilemma at the heart of this. Given what it was she did, that most people would agree is terrible. The kind of gut visceral reaction a lot of people will have of what should happen to someone who did that. But then realizing and thinking about the reality of what's actually being done to her, and realizing that because of the memory loss involved in the way that they are tormenting her, she's not the same person as the one who did this awful thing. But at the same time, like, well, would she still be capable of being that person? Can she carry the sins for that person? Is it still deserved? And I have my own opinions on that. For my money, it is a miscarriage of justice. But I remember the comments when I did my review on that. They were heated on both sides. People were really, really firm on which they thought was the correct side of that moral dilemma to be on. And the fact that it was that big a split and that clear a split, and thankfully this was back in the days where people would vocalize their opinions but not necessarily feel the need to attack those who disagreed with them. Happened sometimes. It didn't happen as much, at least not on my channel, in my comments. Probably because I was masculine presenting at the time, so I didn't have as many argumentative dickheads who just showed up trying to start fights. But anyways, just seeing how much of a divide this one causes, to me, says that it accomplished what it went for very well. But again, like, yeah, it's bleak. It's real bleak. And I know a lot of people kind of consider that to be a staple of Black Mirror, and to an extent, sure, but sometimes things are just slightly on the edge of being a little bit too bleak for me. And this is right on the edge of that. Number 17, White Christmas. This is another one that I know that I ranked much higher. I think largely because of the emotional impact of the last story involved, you know, with the guy and the young kid that he thought was his. That thing hit me real hard, and that broke me in a lot of ways. It broke me in a way that the only other thing that I can think of off the top, not necessarily the only other thing that did it, but the only other thing off the top of my head that broke me to that extent was Under the Skin, the beach scenes. If you've seen it, then you know. And if you haven't seen it, I'm not going to explain it to you. But like, it broke me in a similar way and for a similar reason. The thing was, the rest of it didn't leave a lot of lasting impact. Like, that particular aspect of it, that hit and that landed and that hurt. It hurt a lot. But the rest of it is just kind of there. Like, it's fine. It's functional. I kind of remember it. But when all of its weight was just in that one moment, and it's a moment that I don't care to revisit or relive, I can acknowledge its power while also going, maybe I was buoying up the rest of it on the strength of that alone a little bit last time I did this ranking. Number 16, Crocodile. Does some similar stuff to White Christmas, and it hurt me in a similar way, though not as bad, but also gives an overall package that the surrounding elements also stuck with me more. So that's kind of why it edged up over White Christmas for me. It's managing to tackle, or at least hit, some of the same nerves for me as a viewer, but the overall conception and nature of it, and the ins and outs of the tech involved, and the nature of just this woman and the extent to which she lets this technology dictate how far she takes something. It's a story overall that is lasted in my brain more than the story of White Christmas did. So yeah, I got to give this one the slight edge over. Number 15, Loch Henry. So this is from the latest season. This is the one dealing with sort of true crime documentaries. And this one, as well as another one that we'll get to in a little bit, I think is largely made by the very end, by its closing moments that make it clear what it is it's actually doing. Because yes, it's taking apart the sensational nature of these kinds of documentaries. Yes, it is sort of looking at the way that trying to look at, these kinds of horrible events through the lens of these kinds of presentations is distancing, and then having it smack you in the face when you realize you can't actually distance yourself from this because of what goes on with one of the characters. And then at the very end, just leaving him sitting in that hotel room by himself, looking at this suicide note from his mother and just realizing, you know what? No matter what you made this into, no matter what it was, no matter what praise, awards, whatever, ultimately, you just have to sit here with your trauma. You can turn your trauma into art. You can turn it into schlock. You can do something with it, but it's still just trauma. And you're still stuck with it. That's very Black Mirror, and I like that. Number 14, Black Museum. This is one that's gone up in my estimation. I remember last time that I did this list, I kind of knocked it for feeling not quite so much like Black Mirror, feeling a little bit more like Tales from the Crypt in terms of its overall tone and presentation. But honestly, I kind of like it for that now. I kind of like it for that divergence, and like it has its most campy over the top story as its first of the 3 stories, and it delves in a little bit deeper with each subsequent one, and the ending for the framing story actually ends up being quite cathartic, which I actually really love when Black Mirror does catharsis. It doesn't do it a ton, but when it does, it makes me really happy. And this is one of the more cathartic finales for an episode of Black Mirror that I would say is out there at all. So this one, I like it. Number 13, Rachel, Jack, and Ashley 2. Yeah, I like the one with Miley Cyrus. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know if it was a Miley Cyrus backlash that had people kind of dunking on this one when it came out. I think it's quite good. I think the dynamic between the siblings is good. I think the way in which it examines how, people who are, managers, agents, record executives, whatever it is, who sort of own the image and the work of a pop star or celebrity or whatever, and sort of leave the human being behind as much as they can get away with doing through the lens of how this one does it with the little Ashley 2 robot and all that. I think it's really clever theming. I think it's well pulled together, and I just think it works. I think it's fun. And I think especially in the wake of something like Free Britney, which happened after this aired, I think people might be due to reassess this one. Number 12, National Anthem. The very first episode, and this is the other one, like Loch Henry, that the very end is what makes it. So the thing is, the very end of this, because, we have dealt with this weird, twisted assignment that this guy sort of gives to the prime minister. Will he do it? Won't he? He does it. We see the impact. And then ultimately, we also see that the world moves on. Like, people are amused, entertained, disgusted, but then also they get over it. But then he has to go home. And his wife's there. And she can't look at him. The internet has a long memory but a short attention span. The internet never forgets what you did, but it will stop paying attention to you pretty quickly if you don't keep giving it reason to pay attention to you. Your wife is still there, dude. She still has to see you every day. She can't just move on. And that really nails that episode. And also, I always appreciate this one just as a boldness of sort of intent and purpose. Like, I've seen some people suggest, oh, you shouldn't watch the first episode first. I actually think you should, because to my way of viewing it, the reason this first episode is like this is because it's basically saying, look, we're not saying this is what every episode will be like, but if you can't handle this, you shouldn't be here. You should just leave. I just admire that. Number 11, Joan is awful. The first episode of the latest season, and I just had a good time with this. I just thought the performances were a lot of fun. Clearly, the actors involved, especially some of the bigger names they got, are having an absolute blast in this one. And that fun is infectious. And it is kind of a lighter, it's not a particularly deep dive into the ethics or the technology that's at play. It's one of sort of the more surface level as far as that goes, but it's just a lot of fun to see this thing unravel and realize the nature of it and just watch it all play out and to see these actors showing up and putting in the work in the parts that they've got. It's just fun. Black Mirror is not always fun, but you know what? I like it when it's fun. It does fun well. This is fun. Number 10, Hated in the Nation. This one's really interesting because the technology that, or at least one of the aspects of the technology in it, the whole artificial bees thing is weird and like sort of one of the more like, what? But the actual ethical and moral and thematic heart of this, of internet hate mobs, of piling on, and of removing the context of why people do it, of how they justify it, and why they think it's okay. Oh, I'm just doing this because that person does deserve what they're getting. I'm just doing it to be part of the moment and part of this zeitgeist that's going on. I'm just doing it because I'm bored. It doesn't matter. It's still not okay. And as far as this episode is concerned, you'll be judged the same regardless of your reason. Whether you know you don't have a good reason for doing it, or whether you have lied to yourself and think that you do, you will be judged the same. This is really good. Number 9, Hang the DJ. This was the first quote-unquote happy ending episode of Black Mirror that I personally saw. Because if you weren't aware, I actually watched season 4 first because it's an anthology. You can watch it out of order. And then I went back and watched the other ones. But I like the way that this kind of snowballs and sort of the way that it makes light and also like acknowledges the depths of the frustration and pain of just trying to connect with people, just trying to find something that works. I don't put it higher than this partially because and so a little bit like, and this is going to be a weird one to compare to, but a little bit like Shut Up and Dance. I kind of like what I thought was going on a little bit more than what actually is, because what I thought was going on was that, all of these relationships that these people are being put in, and, sometimes they're incredibly short, sometimes they last for ages, even though these people cannot stand each other. What I thought it was going to do was basically acknowledge the fact that an algorithm like that is only cared about the end results, and it doesn't really care if you enjoy the process. That it will put you through hell if it can get you to the end result that you asked it to give you. It doesn't care if you enjoy how it got there. And then the end result that it's, sort of just running these simulations over and over and over again. It still works. I just don't find it quite as interesting. But having kind of gotten over that and accepting it for what it is, as opposed to kind of what I almost would have preferred it to be, I do still like it. And by the end, it's just heartwarming. Number 8, Demon 79. Last episode of the most recent season. This one I like the more I think about it. I actually, when I first finished watching it, I didn't think I was going to put it this high on the list. But you know what? The more I think about it, how early it introduces supernatural elements, the amazing chemistry between its leads, Nida and Goff, and how well it embodies just how things were turning in a really nasty direction in places like the UK in 79 on the verge of the Thatcher era of politics. It really captures a moment in time that I can't claim to its accuracy. I wasn't alive and I didn't live there, but it feels very authentic, and it feels like it gives credence to a perspective that I'm certainly more interested in. If you're going to show me that point in time, then I think we get more commonly. And it manages to do an end of the world story that doesn't piss me off. And if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know ending the world or destroying entire planets, it tends to piss me off. It doesn't here. It works. I go into more detail as to why in my review of this episode, but suffice to say, it's rare for something to be able to end with a nuclear holocaust, but two characters joining hand in hand to walk into literal oblivion, and I've got a big smile on my face, but here we are. Number 7, Nosedive. This one's gone up in my estimation largely just because I've kind of gotten over my discomfort of the middle. So, how do I want to put this? I always felt that the beginning and the ending were brilliant. The way in the beginning that social media tugs on you, adjust your expectations. Like, speaking as someone who does this as my living, who like watches the view numbers, moderates my comments, like I do all this stuff myself. I literally have a ticker on my channel for my subscriber count, which is part of how I value my worth. And I know that's not healthy, but I do it anyway. Boy, the front end hit me hard. And then the tail end, the ending of it is really cathartic. And I would argue counts as a happy ending by Black Mirror standards. I really love the ending in that jail. It's so good. The middle was hard for me, especially the stuff at the wedding, because it's cringe-inducing, and I'm not good with cringe. Now, it helps that it's not cringe humor. You're meant to feel bad for her. Like, maybe you laugh a little, but you're not meant to point and laugh. You're meant to understand how horrible she feels through all of this. And I did, and it made me uncomfortable. And hasn't really stopped ever being the case, but I have gotten to a point where I'm like, this is necessary to get to the ending. So I'm more forgiving of it now than I was previously. And when you start this good and you end this good, and the middle may be rough, but it is what it should be in order to get you that ending. Yeah, no, that's a full package. Number 6, The Entire History of You. I think this one stands as a very pure examination of what if this technology was real? Because it really does feel like an examination of, okay, technologically, we could do this. What would it do to us? Would it be good for us? Because to put it in short, humans don't have perfect memory. They don't have perfect recall. And there's probably good reason for that. At this point, for the kind of social animals that we are, what would we do? What would we be like if we could just roll our life experience back and re-examine every little moment, every little tone of voice, every little glance, and overthink it? Depending on the kind of person you are, that's a real unhealthy spiral. And I think this examines how unhealthy that spiral is very, very well. Because if you've ever been the kind of person who, whether you wanted to or not, has moments in your head that you can't stop replaying, or you can't stop rethinking through, or you can't keep yourself from overanalyzing, boy, does this one hit hard. Number 5, Be Right Back. This is a really good examination of grief. Grief is a tough thing to do justice to in a format like this, because usually to properly examine grief, you really need a good amount of time spent with the thing that is lost as well as the person who has lost it, and there isn't the time for that here. So it examines grief in a very specific way, and again, sort of extrapolating out from current technology. So in the way that after someone is gone, you can still look at their social media posts and remember them as they presented themselves to the world. And that becomes embodied in this recreation of the man she lost. but he's also incomplete because we don't share our entire selves on social media. There are whole swaths of who we are that never go on there. And eventually, he just becomes a reminder of what she lost. Not a proper recreation of it, but a reminder. And he gets put up in the attic with all the other things that she can't look at anymore, but she also can't bring herself to get rid of. This is a really powerful examination of grief, and it's really well done. Number 4, Striking Vipers. I suspect I rank this one a bit higher than some people do. I love this episode. I love it for a multitude of reasons. First of all, again, Charlie Brooker understands games. Thank goodness. So the integration of the video game aspects and, sort of having that friend that you connected to and bonded with over games like that all feels very genuine and very well done. And then as the sex aspect comes into it, the nature of being able to explore a different part of who you are through an avatar, that's really well done. The nature of fidelity, of exploration, of is this healthy? And then the final resolution of how they seem to have figured it out. They've worked it out. They have a system. It's not a free-for-all, but it's no more secrets. Like, as somebody in polyamorous relationships right now, yes. And it also has one of the most brilliant cuts ever, because I've talked about like cringing stuff, and like you can see Anthony Mackie's character winding up to tell his wife. He takes a breath and then it cuts and it jumps ahead. We don't need to know. We don't need to watch how deeply uncomfortable that conversation would have been. We just jump to where they've worked it out, how it's going to be. We get to see that resolution. The dynamic and the chemistry between all the characters, including the fighting game avatars, is just so good across the board. I love this episode. This thing's great. Number 3, USS Callister. This was the very first episode of Black Mirror that I ever watched. And boy, did it hook me. I mean, it doesn't hurt that it's allegorically using Star Trek, because I like Star Trek. So that certainly doesn't hurt. But this exploration of NPCs within a game, of how much programming goes into them, and then like they're stuck just doing this. But also the theft of other people's sense of self, of their personhood, and just repurposing it for your own entertainment and amusement and sadism in some cases. And again, catharsis. Not a lot of Black Mirror does it. This one has a cathartic ending, and boy, do I love it. I love the way that this, like, it is possible to make fun of geek culture and a certain kind of obsessive geek without insulting geeks. And this does it. Like, it's a fine line to walk. And again, Charlie Brooker actually knows what he's talking about. This is just good. This is also probably one of the most quotable episodes. Number 2, 15 Million Merits. If someone were to ask me to give them one episode of Black Mirror to watch, to get an idea of what it is, depending on that person, I would either recommend to them USS Callister, or I would recommend to them this. And odds are, for most people, I'd recommend this. This is kind of the platonic ideal of examining the technology, the far end, the logical extreme of the technology that we already have. Where does that go? Where does that lead? And examining the impact of that on people. And examining the literal running on treadmills. And that's just all you do. To spend fake money on fake entertainment. And to try and grasp for something real. And to actually connect. To bare your soul. And have that get monetized. Speaking as someone who, again, makes their living on a platform like YouTube, whoo, boy. And the performances in this, especially from Daniel Kaluuya, phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. This has everything that Black Mirror does, and it has it at perfection. But it's not my number one. And if you've been around this channel for a while, not only do you know what number one's going to be, you've known since the moment this list started. And it's not because it's necessarily better than 15 Million Merits. But it's just because it hits me harder and in a nicer place. Right in the feels. Number one, San Junipero. This is one of the most beautiful love stories I've ever seen put to film. The acknowledgement of the limitations of these two women, that as much as they fit together, they're not perfect. Neither of them is. That things are messy and complicated. And things that you've lost and left behind, you still carry with you and they still hurt. And the push and pull of holding on to the moments you have now when you could have more, but will it still be good? If there's more, will it hurt? If you try and hold on to more, should you just let it be fleeting? Do you embrace it? I love this story. This is one of... I have a tendency to complain about love stories in a lot of things. Largely it's because there's a lot of times when love stories feel superfluous, like they're not contributing. But I do still appreciate good love stories. And this is one of my favorite. This is one of the best love stories I've ever seen. Brilliant use of setting, amazing performances, the music choice. This is brilliant. This is amazing. San Junipero is my number one pick for Black Mirror. That is my list. I have no doubt it differs a lot from other people's. So I want to hear yours or your thoughts on mine or whatever you feel like sharing. Drop it all down in the comments and let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living. As I mentioned a couple times, that this is how I actually make my living. It's so weird to be talking about a show that delves into technology when my job is this dependent on technology. But in any case, even if you can't help me out on Patreon, like, share, subscribe. There's links to other things I do. You know the drill. But what I really want you to remember is you are beautiful. You are valid. You are loved. You are the council. I am just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And now my thanks to my Patreon supporters that make this possible, including Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfullah, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Ruth, Oliver B., Solitary Pictures, Ulrich Bogdan, Melinda Walters, Jen, T. Love, Auntie Kate 808, Bernabe Likes the Poodle, Robin Powell, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Adam RDL Taylor, Dave Hall, Shayla Gourlay, and Rosalind Bennett. You can get I get all the names right and then I can't talk. If you want to hear me stumble over my tongue after saying your name, it's in the rewards here on the Patreon.